When day turns to night, and the moon is most bright, shed the king of you and wear the queen. The 9 realms will open and your magic be free.
Adam couldn't master witchcraft, no matter how hard he tried, until the goddess Freya showed him the power deep inside. By the silvery light of the moon, he began to change his form, transported to a mystic realm, a heroine was born. Nova Jupiter Jenkins, Nova Jupiter Jenkins, guardian of the endless library halls. Nova Jupiter Jenkins, Nova Jupiter Jenkins, deep down there is magic in us all.
Hi, my bling. It's your favorite drag witch, Nova Jupiter Jenkins. My friends call me Nova JJ, and you can too. If you're just joining us, I'd recommend heading back and checking out previous episodes to get caught up on the sitch with this witch. Well, it's not Friday the 13th, but it is the 13th, and it is October, my favorite time of year. The smell of freshly carved pumpkins fills the air, along with the sound of bat wings flapping and ghosts getting their spook on. It's also Canadian Thanksgiving. Even though the indigenous people of North America have a very long history of harvest celebration feasts, the first colonizers' Thanksgiving is said to have been in 1578, though that is somewhat in dispute as the reason for thanks wasn't related to the harvest. There were some annual November feasts started around 1606 to fight the scurvy epidemic, and they were due to some French explorer and other returning from an expedition. The first traditional Thanksgiving with turkey and all the fixins was introduced in Halifax in the 1750s. The first annual feast that was celebrated in Canada post-Confederation was November 6th, 1879. The date it was celebrated and the reason for giving thanks, usually the harvest and some anniversary related to the British monarchy, were determined by Parliament each year. But I doubt any of those reasons, including giving thanks for the land they stole. Just a hunch. It wasn't until January 31st, 1957, that Parliament proclaimed it to be the second Monday of every year for giving thanks to God for the bountiful harvest with which Canada had been blessed, and which the Europeans empowered themselves to take from the people who were already enjoying that blessing. Thanks. I do want to say thank you myself to my handful of loyal listeners and to my friends who have stood by me through thick and thin, including my 2 darling familiars, Hugo and Munsey, who you may hear meowing in the background from time to time. I'm also grateful for the gift of yarn craft and the inspiration that Adam's grandmothers provided when he was growing up. It was truly magical. So let's jump into Craft Corner. So speaking of grandmothers or grannies, today I want to talk about what might be considered a retro or outdated technique in the world of crochet, but is one of the most versatile tools you can have in your arsenal of yarn craft skills, and that's the granny square. This basic building block of crochet architecture has been keeping us cozy for generations. They seem to date back to the late 19th century, and they can be combined in any number of ways to make a plethora of cozy items. The squares themselves can have a number of beautiful variations and even shapes. You can have granny pentagons, granny hexagons, and so forth. They're often used to make blankets, but they can also make other things like vests and different things. One of my favorite variations is called the African flower motif. I often use it to make wrist warmers or fingerless gloves, as well as mittens and slippers, which are perfect items to make for yourself or others, since the holiday that shall not be named is not too far behind Halloween. I'll have Adam put some links in the show notes. And now it's tarot time. So the card we're going to be exploring today is the Six of Cups. Now, as you may remember, cups are generally associated with water and emotion. This particular card can represent an indecisiveness in matters of the heart, or making the wrong choice in a romantic relationship because of a refusal to listen to the heart. It can also represent the loss of a love or the mourning of that loss, or nostalgia, or being left alone, like a widow. Reversed, it can represent new possibilities opening up in a relationship, making the right decision, or new friendships or partnerships, as well as a general renewal. Previously, I talked about how the meaning of a card can be affected by the card that appears next to it in a spread, so we're going to try something a little different. We're going to make the meaning of this card a two-part discussion, the second part coming next episode when we look at the card for that episode. And that means that story time will also be in two parts. So let's jump into part number 1. So the story for this episode is untitled, but if you want to give it a title, we'll maybe have an impromptu contest. So if you can title this story and send me a tweet at njupiterjenkins with the hashtag NovaJJ, NOVAJJ, with the title of the story, and I will pick the winner and they will get a little surprise from me. It's going to be something knit or crochet, of course. Okay. Iris didn't hear the pastor's words. On the pew next to her, her daughter Maggie held her hand, but Iris didn't really feel it. She missed Howard, and the pulsing wound that she felt around the gaping hole in her heart drowned out all other sensations. She closed her eyes and tried to call forth a happy memory from when they were younger, but the wound seemed to have severed her access to those images. She needed her photo albums. She needed to see his face smiling and warm and full of light and life, not that cold husk in the box only a few feet from where she sat. She tried to move and found she couldn't. Looking down, she saw that Maggie still held tightly to her hand. At her attempt to pull away, Maggie only held more tightly and flashed her the briefest of pitying, patronizing smiles in a half-hearted attempt at comfort. Iris endured the rest of the service as a statue, and as everyone rose, she finally broke free of her daughter's grasp, only long enough for Maggie to put her hands on Iris's shoulders to steer her to the reception hall of the church. She felt a prisoner being marched to execution as the immediate family of the deceased paraded their way to the hall, while the rest of the attendees looked on awkwardly. Once in the reception hall, Iris wanted to head straight for the photo albums that sat on the table off to one side, but Maggie steered her to a chair so she could be comfortable while she received people's condolences. Iris wanted to protest, but before she could, the attendees came flooding in from the nave and lined up to shower her with sympathy. She received them without really seeing them, hoping she was nodding in the right places. Howard's boss was in the middle of some idiotic misremembered anecdote involving Howard when the outside door to the hall banged open loudly, startling everyone and cutting off all their whispers. A gust of wind blew in from outside, carrying a few autumn leaves, and a tall woman with dark hair and pale skin. She wore a beautiful dress, deep blood red with a black tulle overlay. Everyone stared silently at her, waiting for her to realize she was in the wrong place. The woman surveyed the room and spotted Iris. Her startling green eyes pierced Iris's fog, the way a single beam of sunlight may pierce a cloudy sky to shine on the countryside. The woman smiled and made a beeline for Iris, somehow parting the people while at the same time behaving as though they did not exist. People glared at her audacity, but she took no notice. Without hesitation, she bent down and hugged Iris and said, "My dear, I'm so sorry for your loss." In the same motion, she pulled Iris from her chair and led her away from the crowd. "Come, we must talk." "Excuse me," some cousin or other said indignantly. The woman turned to face the assemblage, her arm around Iris protectively. "Let us end this charade. Iris does not want to sit here and have you heap your sad energy onto her, and you do not want to stand here and wait to talk to someone whose sorrow reminds you of your own impending mortality. She's aware that you love her, and that you're there if she needs anything. You're just a quick phone call away, etc., and so forth and so on. Thank you for coming. Leave your casseroles on the counter. Dismissed. Everyone was too stunned to respond, and the woman turned with Iris and walked to the nave. As they passed the table of mementos, she scooped up the most prominently featured photo album in her other arm. She led the way into the nave and then turned, and they made their way up the stairs that led to the gallery seats overlooking the main congregation. The woman sat Iris and herself down in a pew. "Oh, such beasts," she said. "We dinna really need to talk, of course. We never did. I just said that so hopefully they would afford us some privacy." Just as she finished speaking, they heard the door to the nave open beneath them, and the woman sighed. "Too much to ask for, I suppose." "Mother?" Maggie's voice echoed in the large room. "Maybe if we're quiet she'll go away," the woman whispered. Iris smiled and almost wanted to giggle. Shortly they heard Maggie ascend the stair, and another moment later her head appeared round the corner. "It's not really possible to be quiet in here," Maggie said, and the woman attempted to look abashed, and failed. She patted Iris's leg, deposited the album into her lap, and stood and went to hug Maggie. "I'm so sorry for your loss, dear, and please forgive my rudeness. I just hated to see your mother so bombarded. You're doing such a good job with the guests. Could you give us just a little time alone?" "Who are you exactly?" Maggie asked, bewildered. "An old friend of your mother's, from before you were born. We can get into all that later. Just now we need a bit of time." "Mother?" Maggie looked around the woman at Iris. "Just a few minutes, Maggie." Maggie nodded without saying anything more and left. Iris clung to the photo album and looked up at the woman. "Are we old friends? I'm sorry. You seem familiar, like a fading memory of a dream, but I can't quite recall." The woman looked like her heart had been torn out. Tears streamed down her face as she sat back down. "Yes, my dear, we are. Very old friends. Don't you remember? It's me, Eunice." "Eunice?" Iris tried the name out in her mouth and found that it fit there like finding her favorite childhood outfit and having it fit after long stretches of years. Her eyes went wide, and tears began to flow as freely as Eunice's. She reached her arms out to the woman, the photo album slipping, forgotten, to the floor. "Forgive me. Oh, please forgive me." Eunice hugged her tightly and said, "Of course, my love. Of course." Stay tuned for next week when we look at the next card and how it can affect the Six of Cups and our story. We'll have our story naming contest go until the next full moon so that everyone's had a chance to listen to both parts of the story and get their responses in. So I hope all my bling are having a beautiful Halloween season. I'd truly appreciate it if you could share us with a friend or two. Rate, comment, or subscribe on Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And remember, crochet a gift for a person and they'll be warm for the season. Teach a person a crochet and they'll turn into a yarn-obsessed monster with a never-ending hunger. Bye!